Good morning, sir. Can you see and hear us?
Yes, thank you.
We're hearing from Mr. McCausland this morning.
Yeah.
I do solemnly, sincerely and truly, declare and affirm that the evidence I shall give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Please could you state your full name?
Neil William McCausland.
Mr. McCausland, thank you very much for firstly providing a detailed written statement and secondly for attending the inquiry to give oral evidence today. I want to turn to that witness statement. Do you have it in front of you?
I do.
For the record, that is WITN 10290-100. Can I ask you please to turn to page 76 of that statement? Do you see paragraph 203 and then beneath that a statement of truth?
Yes.
And then on the other side there's a signature. Is it your signature?
Yes.
And are the facts stated in that statement true to the best of your knowledge and belief?
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. McCausland. That stands as your evidence in the inquiry. It will be published shortly on the inquiry's website. I'm going to ask you some questions about parts of it. I'll start very briefly with your background. Following various roles with Marks & Spencer, you became Managing Director of C&A in 1999.
Yes.
You then became CEO of a government-owned business called Navy, Army and Air Force Institute between 2001 and 2002.
Yes.
Was that your last executive role?
Yes, it was.
Could I just ask you to move slightly closer to the microphones, please, just so they pick you up? Thank you. You've then held a number of non-executive chair roles between 2000 and when you joined Post Office in September 2011.
That's correct.
And pointed to September 2011. At that point, you joined Post Office Limited as Senior Independent Director.
Correct.
Did you know Alice Perkins before you were recruited to Post Office Limited?
No, I had no knowledge of her at all.
What was the time commitment for the role of Senior Independent Director at Post Office?
I cannot quite remember. I have thought about that, and it isn't on my terms of reference. I think that it was 3 or maybe 3 to 4 days a month. I think it was 3 days a month, but it might have been 3 to 4 days a month. But I haven't got a piece of paper that confirms it.
Whilst you were a Senior Independent Director at Post Office, did any other representative from Post Office ask you questions about how much time you were spending on Post Office matters?
Would you mind repeating that?
Yes, of course. Whilst you were a Senior Independent Director at Post Office, did anyone else within the Post Office discuss the amount of hours or days you were spending at Post Office Limited?
Yes, it was a fairly frequent topic of conversation for me and all of the NEDs, including Alice, in that all of us were spending maybe double the amount of time that we, in theory, should have been. Post Office was a very time-intensive job. So I and all of the other NEDs were spending more time, and we did talk about that.
So in practice, you rightly say your terms of reference don't refer to a time commitment. I think you said, was it 3 to 4 days a month was your expectation?
It was either 3 days a month or 3 to 4 days a month.
And does that mean in practice you were working between 6 and 8 days a month on Post Office matters during your time as Senior Independent Director?
That is about right. I would say 2 days a week.
We don't need to turn this up on the screen, but you give a description of your role as Senior Independent Director at page 3, paragraph 7 of your statement. And I want to just raise some of them with you. The first is that you say you were to assist with the development of Post Office Limited strategy.
Yes.
And that effectively means analysing and considering the future direction of the post office?
Absolutely. Post office. Do you want me to expand?
No, well if no, you don't need to, but if you've got something to add, then please do.
Well, the post office that I went into was a very badly run, very messy business. For the 10 years previous, it had had a very sharp decline in profitability. It was losing, the year before I joined, it lost 120 million in a year, and that had been getting steadily worse. The network had been shrinking, the infrastructure was old and creaky, and it was separating out from Royal Mail Group. So it didn't have its own infrastructure, and it was about to get its own infrastructure. It needed to have its own infrastructure to stand alone, and therefore it needed to have a strategy to basically get it back to profitability and make it a sustainable business, because it was not sustainable to keep going as it was. So absolutely, developing strategy was an important part of the job.
When you say, I think it was creaky infrastructure, what infrastructure are you referring to?
Basically everything. The IT infrastructure we knew was old and underinvested and creaky. The physical post offices were underinvested. They were dark, barred, fairly dingy places.
Sorry to cut across you. When you said the IT infrastructure, are you including the Horizon system within that?
Absolutely. The Horizon system we knew was near end of life. I think it was 15 years old by that stage. Most IT systems don't last more than 10 years. So we knew that we had a clunky, underinvested IT infrastructure, which was why an awful lot of work went on during my tenure to develop a new IT strategy which would end up replacing Horizon and Fujitsu.
You joined the post office in September 2011, yes?
Yes.
So a year after post office and Fujitsu had rolled out the Horizon Online system.
So a year after Horizon Online had been rolled out?
Yes. So in those circumstances, why did you think that system was creaky?
Because Horizon Online wasn't a whole rewrite of Horizon. Horizon was still Horizon. It was basically a modified version of Horizon. But it's more like having an iPhone 15, iPhone 16 release. It's not necessarily a whole new system. So Horizon was still a clunky, not a particularly intuitive, not particularly easy to use system.
So when you're using the word creaky, are you using that in a user interface way rather than a technical way of the integrity of the system itself?
Absolutely, yes. It wasn't easy to use. It wasn't intuitive.
One other aspect of strategy presumably would have been to assist in developing the post office's strategy in respect of how it responded to complaints against the Horizon IT system. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
Back to paragraph 7, as I said, we don't need to bring it up. Another point you make is that you needed to monitor performance and hold the executive to account.
Yes.
So when doing that, does that mean probing and challenging the executive on the work that they carry out?
Yes.
And you also say ensuring the risk management system is robust.
Yes.
And does that mean, in effect, ensuring that or overseeing the executive in their identification, analysis and mitigation of risk?
Yes.
And that would include risks arising from the integrity of the Horizon IT system?
Yes.
I'm going to look at that aspect in some detail this morning, but before I do, could we have your witness statement on the screen, please, at page 4, paragraph 9. The paragraph 9, you set out some of your non-executive roles. Can I just first clarify, does this list capture all of the non-executive roles you held whilst at the post office?
I am not 100% sure that it does. That's saying the companies I've worked for since leaving POL.
Yes, if we look at skin clinics, for example, Jules, Create Fertility,
Yeah.
those at least have some overlap with your time at as senior independent director. Let me ask it another way. During your time as senior independent director, did you work at any other companies as a non-executive other than those listed here?
I cannot remember the date, so I certainly have worked with companies which are not listed there before. I cannot remember the dates of leaving some of those companies as to whether they overlapped September 11 or didn't.
Well, let's just look at the ones we have here. Skin Clinics, Jules and Create Fertility. Can you summarise the time commitment that you had to give for each of those companies as a non-executive director?
Jules was 3 days a month. Create Fertility at that stage was very small. It was literally one clinic, so it was probably 2 days a month. And Skin Clinics was also 3 days a month.
So did you feel that you were able to dedicate sufficient time to the post office as senior independent director?
Absolutely. I mean, as I said earlier, I gave at least double, maybe more, the amount of time that in theory I was meant to, but I never felt constrained for time for post office.
I'll move to my first topic I want to look at, and that's some of the assurances in respect of IT that you refer to in your witness statement. Please could we go to page 8 of the statement at paragraph 17. You say that I recall being assured by Ernst & Young's audit partner, Angus Grant, the CFO, Chris Day, the COO, Mike Young, and the Chief Information Officer, Leslie Sewell, that the integrity of the accounting systems was sound, albeit slow and clunky. Given that I'm not an expert in either IT or accountancy, I defer to their expertise on these issues. When you say the integrity of the accounting systems, presumably there you're including the Horizon IT system within it.
Yes.
And when you say albeit slow and clunky, is that the same as we discussed before, more of a user interface matter rather than a data integrity issue?
Yes. I was not of the understanding then that data integrity was at issue.
Can you recall the first time that, I want to start internally with the executive, that the CFO, Chris Day, Mike Young, or Leslie Sewell discussed with you the Horizon IT system?
I think if I go to the very first time that it was discussed, it was probably actually Susan Crichton who was doing the discussing. And that took place at a board before independence, so before I had even met Angus. And at that board, Les Owen, if I remember rightly, who was still a director of the Post Office Board at that stage, had asked Susan Crichton about the Access Legal Shoesmith's letters, and had asked about the strength of the legal claims. And Susan, at that stage, reassured Les that their legal claims were weak and that there had been an audit done, which had been very positive, and that had been reviewed by an external party, Deloitte, and also that that in all previous prosecutions where Horizon data had been used, we had been successful. So at the time, that was probably my first induction into the integrity of Horizon data. And I was listening to an experienced RMG director talking to our general counsel, and there was a very clear, very robust answer from Susan Crichton that the system was sound. So that was probably the first time that Horizon issues really came into my mind. But after that exchange, I had the impression that they were strong.
Please go on.
Yeah. As we then became independent and had our first audit committee meeting with Angus Young from EY, Ernst & Young, and also there was a RMG internal audit report that we looked at. Then those documents made it clear that they weren't questioning the data integrity at all, and they weren't even questioning the controls, but they were questioning the documentation of controls. They were basically saying that the documentation of the controls was not as strong as it needed to be. There was a discussion with EY that it had taken them longer to actually do the audit, and that they had not been able to rely on the documentation which existed, and therefore they had to create some of that documentation themselves, which had led to an overrun in time and cost. So data integrity wasn't an issue in my mind. The controls had a small issue, but the documentation of controls had a large issue.
Could we please just bring up page 68, paragraph 181 of your statement? Just go down the page, please. You see, it says the board were consistently provided reassurance by a multitude of individuals, many of whom had either specialist IT or accountancy expertise, that Horizon was robust and fit for purpose. Examples of this include, and then if we turn the page, so I think you're effectively, in your evidence, just summarised those bits. The first bullet point is the board meeting on the 12th of January. The second is the what you say are RMG/Post Office's internal audit with the results reviewed by Deloitte. And then we have 3, the ISAE IT annual audit jointly commissioned by Post Office and Fujitsu. And then 4, the Ernst & Young, the auditors for Post Office regularly audited Fujitsu IT, and you go on to refer to a discussion at the ARC on the audit risk compliance meeting on the 15th of May 2014. Just so we're clear, are those the 4 matters you were referring to in your evidence then?
Not quite. So I was referring to the first one,
Yep.
which was Susan Crichton's assurances, which at the time I believed. With hindsight, it becomes clear that pretty much
We're going to come to those.
They were wrong.
Just take me as
Yeah.
through.
Okay. The second one I was referring to, the internal audit, I wasn't referring to the ISAE 3402.
Right. Well,
That came later. So by this time, ISA 3402 was not in existence. However, as a consequence of those meetings, we did force Fujitsu to introduce ISA 3402, which the following year, 12-13, came into existence.
so that's pausing there then. When you referred in your evidence to Deloitte and the audit taking longer, needing to create their own paperwork, were you referring to what we've heard as the SAS 70 issue?
No.
No.
So, in the first year that I saw the audit report, so my first audit committee meeting with Angus Young from EY, that audit had run for longer than it was expected to run and had cost more. And that was partly because Horizon Online was new. It was partly because EY had a new team who were doing the auditing. But it was significantly because the controls were not in place. As a result of all of that, then that was one of the reasons why we were saying it can't be right that this is the case. EY shouldn't be needing to work that hard to do that. We should be able to rely on our supplier to have a suite of documentation that our auditor can simply look at and test rather than needing to construct it themselves. And that is what led to the request to do SAS 70, and SAS 70 then morphed into ISAE 3402. So effectively they are one and the same thing.
Did Mr. Grant, the Ernst & Young audit partner, say anything to you about the integrity of the Horizon IT system in recording transactions at a branch level?
There was absolutely no comment from Mr. Grant that the data integrity was in any way compromised or poor.
Alice Perkins gave evidence to the inquiry on the 5th and 6th of June 2024, and her evidence was that she had a conversation with Angus Grant during her induction, of which she says she made a note. I want to bring that note up, please. It's WITN 20740122. We see a post office notepad, and presumably you didn't see this note until the inquiry sent it to you.
Correct.
If we can look halfway down, please. And it says, right in the middle almost, with Fujitsu, post office have a hard bargain, or drove a very hard bargain, on price, but they took back on quality/assurance. Was that something you were aware of at the time?
I was not aware of that at the time. I subsequently became aware not of an issue relating to data integrity, but of there was an issue where we had, I'm trying to remember now, so later than this, there were some customer incidents which affected customers where basically Fujitsu Horizon dropped out. And when Leslie Sewell investigated that and reported to the board, the reason for that was because the data center we had used to have 2 backup data centers, and we'd moved to 1, which I think had been a cost-saving exercise in the migration to Horizon Online. So that subsequently I learned, which was probably, this might have been what that was talking about, quality. But at the time, I certainly had no knowledge that when Horizon Online had been commissioned, we had, RMG had driven a hard bargain and there had been a reduction in quality or assurance.
Further down, it says Horizon, and then a dash, it says, is a real risk for us. Does it capture data accurately? And then cases of fraud, suspects suggest it's a system problem. And Alice Perkins' evidence was that this is something Mr. Grant had said, who raised a question as to the accuracy of data being captured by Horizon, and then the second point being referring to the claims of which you became aware. Did Mr. Grant say anything along those lines to you around the time you joined Post Office?
No, I don't recall meeting Mr. Grant before the Audit Committee meeting, which was in 2012, so I don't believe that I saw him in 2011. And when I did meet him, I had the EY report, and neither in his conversation nor in the EY report does he say that he is worried about data integrity.
Did Alice Perkins raise or pass on any of this information to you in the early days of being a senior independent director?
I have no recollection of her talking about that.
That can come down, thank you. Could we now look at, I was going to go through the sources of assurance that you referred to, and we'll start with the board meeting. I think you were referring to the 12th of January one. It's poll 30-21503. So we see that it's a meeting of the Board of Directors on the 12th of January, and you are listed as present as the Senior Independent Director. Please can we turn to page 6 of that document. And to the bottom, please. So it's, as you said, Les Owen asked for assurance that there was no substance to the claims brought by sub-postmasters which had featured in Private Eye. Now, just pausing there, I understand it's your evidence that at this point you were aware of the claims through the significant litigation report. Is that right?
Yes, the significant litigation report had just been published for the first time.
But your evidence is you hadn't seen the letter of claim by Shoesmith's Access Legal.
That is correct. The first time I saw those was in the inquiry.
And again, your evidence is at this point you weren't aware that one of the allegations was that Fujitsu could access remotely branch accounts and either insert, edit or delete transactions.
That is correct.
I'm going to refer to that in short term as remote access from now on.
Okay.
So he says Susan Crichton explained that the sub-postmasters were challenging the integrity of the Horizon system. However, the system had been audited by RMG internal audit with the reports reviewed by Deloitte. The audit was very positive. And then at the bottom it says Susan Crichton suggested that she clear the audit report with the external lawyers, and if it is possible to give the report privilege status, it would be circulated to the board. Did you ever see an audit report by Deloitte on these internal audits?
No, I don't believe, I didn't. I don't believe there was an audit report by Deloitte. With hindsight. At the time, clearly I didn't know that, but I don't believe that there was one.
Had you seen the RMG internal audit itself at that point?
No, I hadn't, although I did see it subsequently.
So is that the RMG internal audit, is that a document we may come to, but what's been described as an assurance review and a series of slides showing an assurance review?
Yes.
Did you ask any questions at this stage about what the internal audit investigated or its detailed findings?
I did not. At this stage, I was very new, I was still absorbing, and this was a conversation between Les Owen, who had been on the RMG board, and had, they were the ones who had commissioned this internal audit, and this had been going on for some months. So Les was asking Susan about it, and the interchange was between Les and Susan. I was listening at this stage, absorbing, assimilating, and as I say, I came out of that reassured, wrongly with hindsight, but at the time reassured, that the Horizon system was good integrity, and that the claims against us were weak.
Finally, the comment, the business has also won every criminal prosecution which it has used evidence based on the Horizon system's integrity. You may have said this in your evidence earlier, but just so we're clear, who said that?
So Susan said in answer to Les's question that she said exactly that, which again, with hindsight, I now know is wrong. But at the time, I didn't know it was wrong. At the time, I didn't question it. If the General Counsel is talking to an existing RMG and now POL director in a board meeting and says something, I believe her.
And in terms of what you can recall now about her answer, did she provide any other detail or any other context around what we see recorded here?
I'm sure she did, but I cannot remember it. This was 13, 14 years ago, and inevitably the minutes of a board meeting, the board meeting will last all day, and the minutes are maybe 8 or 10 pages long, so the minutes do not capture all of the conversation. So I'm sure that there was a fairly large conversation around that, but I do not know any more than I can see from the minutes. I cannot remember.
Could we turn, please, to Poll 21430? So this is a meeting of the Audit Risk and Compliance Subcommittee on the 13th of November 2012. Again, we can see you are in attendance, and at the bottom we can see that Angus Grant, the audit partner of Ernst & Young, is there, along with another representative of Ernst & Young. Could we please turn to page 4? And if we can just scroll down, please. So E refers to AG, so it's Mr. Grant setting out matters of about the audit. So he expected that 2012-13 will be a challenging year for the business in several areas because of separation and major change, and that the audit would only need to focus on separation, pensions and taxation with an overlay of IT. Sets out the method of doing it, of the focus, sorry. And then F, the ARC was comfortable with the approach alongside the separate ISAE 3402 IT audit, which we referred to earlier in your statement, which had been jointly commissioned by the Post Office and Fujitsu. Says the chairman asked at what level of materiality the E&Y team would report. Mr. Grant explained that this would be similar to previous years, although E&Y did put a figure on profit and loss materiality. They were proposed to report any identified audit adjustments above 600,000 to the committee and, as a general rule, insist on changes to the accounts for any single item or accumulation of items with an effect of over 5 to 6 million. This was accepted. When you say you took assurance from the IT audits. Did that give you any assurance as to the integrity of the Horizon IT system in recording data at a branch level?
There wasn't a specific, I cannot recall a specific comment about that. However, EY would have spent a lot of time at the Chesterfield, I think it was, accounting centre, and in order to sign off the accounts, EY would have needed to ensure that they were happy with the integrity of the accounting system, including the branch accounting system. And if they weren't, there would have been a discussion, and there would have been a matter of emphasis in the accounts. Now, I cannot remember that happening, so I cannot remember a specific discussion about branch accounting, but inevitably they will have done that in their audit. And the fact that I can't remember it is probably saying that it wasn't there as an issue. The issues were the things that we primarily concentrated on.
So I don't want to put words in your mouth. I'm just trying to summarise what I think you've said. You can't remember if there was a conversation on integrity of branch accounts in respect of the audit. I think that's yes.
Yes.
But it would have been your assumption that E&Y would have satisfied themselves as to the integrity of the accounting system, yes?
Absolutely.
But you can't help us with knowing what you may have or may not have said or asked to satisfy yourself that that was actually happening.
That is correct. So at this stage, this is an audit planning meeting, and then the audit results meeting will take place subsequently. So here they're talking about how they're going to plan it, then they will have done the audit, and then they'll report on the audit. And there is a detailed document for each. So at the document here, there will have been a document which came to the board, not in the minutes, which will have spelt out exactly how the audit was going to take place, which we will have looked at and said, okay. And that will have included a large amount of work at the Chesterfield, and forgive me if Chesterfield's the wrong place, but at the Chesterfield data centre. And then the report will have come through, and we will have looked at that probably May time the following year, once the audit had been done. And they will have reported on all of their findings. And all of their findings, the ARC, the ARC, would then have pored over and understood where there were problems, and then also made sure that there was an action plan in place to clear up those problems. And my memory from the throughout all of the years was that the issue was not about data integrity, the issue was about controls, and specifically the documentation of controls. And the first audit from 10-11, they had quite a few findings. The second one in 11-12, they had materially fewer findings. And then by 13-14 and 14-15, they were actually very complimentary about the controls and the documentation of controls. And the audit reports specifically articulate that the level of controls has improved very significantly over the period of time.
Thank you. I want to move on, please, to look at the appointment of second sight. And we don't need to turn this up, but in your statement at paragraph 36, paragraphs 98 to 100, I think you make the following points. I just want to confirm them with you. The first is that you say you were not involved in the decision to instruct a forensic accountant or the selection of second sight itself.
Correct.
And you also say in your statement, paragraph 100, that you were not involved, I was not involved in any discussion and or overseeing the drafting of the terms of reference for second sight's investigation.
Correct.
Alice Perkins gave evidence to the inquiry that she spoke to you at some point, couldn't be clear when, but at some point, about the appointment of second sight. We're going to come to the board meeting shortly, but can you recall any conversation outside of the board meeting with Alice Perkins concerning the appointment of second sight?
I have no recollection of that. However, it is quite possible that Alice did. I listened to Alice, and I think that she was referring to her finding it difficult within the business, in that she was getting pushback from Mike Young and Susan Crichton. And so it is, I cannot remember it, but it is perfectly possible that Alice had a conversation with me that said, James Arbuthnot is suggesting this, I think it's a really good idea, I'm getting pushback in the business, what do you think, Neil? That would be the sort of conversation that we would have had. And I would have said, yeah, 100% right, Alice, go for it. Yeah, if you upset Mike and Susan, so be it. But I have no recollection of that, but it's a perfectly feasible conversation. Alice spoke to me about those things regularly.
Well, let's look at one of the board meetings where I think you say it was the first time you can recollect second sight or a forensic accountant being instructed. Please can we bring up poll 30021507. And page, before we go there, we see the 23rd of May 2012, and you're present on the second line. Could we turn to page 8, please? So this is under AOB. It refers to Paula Venables and Alice Perkins updating the board on the meeting with James Arbuthnot and Oliver Letwin. And at the end it says the business had also agreed to use a forensic accountant to investigate the system and give further comfort to those concerned about these cases, referring to the MP's cases that they were championing. We don't need to turn it up, but in your statement, page 36, paragraph 99, you say that you do recall querying whether they being Second Sight, had sufficient manpower and sufficient expertise in IT to be competent in undertaking a comprehensive review of Horizon. The board were assured that they were sufficiently competent and that Susan Crichton had worked with them previously and held them in high regard. At this stage, what type of investigation into the Horizon IT system was being proposed by Paula Venables and the chairman?
I think there was a degree of uncertainty at this stage about what the scope of it would be. And I have a vague recollection of that, and it is only vague, but I came back to it mentally several times in subsequent years, which is why I do have a vague memory of it. So my questioning at that board was, what are Second Sight going to do, and are they good enough to do it? Have they got enough resource to do it? Because they seemed to be a two-man band, and it was very unusual for Post Office to appoint a two-man band to do anything. Normally, we would apply. We would appoint people with large resource. Again, my memory is vague, but I think that I was reassured that they were going to do a review. They were not going to do a fully code-based review, looking at all of the documentation and all of the system. What they instead were going to do was to take the cases that the MPs had given to them and forensically understand what had happened to the money and find system faults through that way. So if I have lost £5,000, if there is a loss of £5,000, go through the forensic accounts and understand where that has happened, and from that identify problems with Horizon. So rather than going bottom up looking at all of the code, they would basically find the root cause of those problems. And so I think that was the discussion at the time, and I was reassured. I remember challenging it, but I remember also being reassured that Second Sight had the capability and the capacity to do that job well.
Could we look, please, at poll 30's96642? If we can go to the bottom of that page, please. We see there's an email from Paula Venables on the 14th of June 2012 to you. So we've moved forward a little bit in the chronology. And it says, Neil, good to see you earlier. And then further down, the meeting with James Arbuthnot went completely to plan, so well worth insisting on it and making the effort to go across. He has agreed to our terms of reference, TOR, I'm taking that as terms of reference, and an individual rather than a blanket approach. But pausing there, where it's referring here to an individual rather than blanket approach, is that going to what the evidence you just gave, that it's looking at individual cases rather than a code-up review?
Yes.
And then if we go up, please, to see your response. You say, Paul, it's always a pleasure to see you. Further down, well done with James. That's presumably referring to Lord Arbuthnot.
Yes.
So you agreed, presumably, at this point with the individual approach rather than the code, overall code review approach?
Yes, I did. Again, my memory is slightly vague, but I think that it was explained to me that because the original code was so old, and because it was so different across the estate, that it would be almost impossible and very expensive to do a proper code review, but that what Second Sight were recommending, i.e. take the individual cases, follow the money, forensically understand where the root cause of that loss had come from, and my belief then was very clear that would be visible as you went through the audit store, so they would be able to track that down. They were bright people, and from that, if then there were 10 instances where there'd been a problem with ATMs had caused a £5,000 loss, that would then say, okay, there's a problem with the system. So yes, I was happy with that approach.
Would you agree that at most what that would show is, in an individual case, a loss may have been caused by the Horizon IT system, but it wouldn't show you if the Horizon IT system as a whole had difficulties or problems?
Well, not necessarily. If we were looking at 47 cases, then if there is a reason behind them, I think you're probably as likely to find it by following the money and really getting to the root cause of each of those 47, as opposed to doing a code-based review. So I'm not sure that a code-based review would actually come up with a problem either. So actually, it did seem a reasonable way of understanding what that was. If there was one, I would absolutely agree with you. But if you're looking at 47, then you should be able to determine whether there are themes which actually are a common theme, which are a problem, a flaw in Horizon.
So was it your view then that if the 47 cases came back and no problem was found on those 47 cases alone, then that would have given the Horizon IT system effectively a clean bill of health?
I think that's what I thought, and I think that's what Second Sight were telling us.
You say in the email, definitely good to keep control of that process. What do you mean by control of that process?
So, this, again, I cannot remember exactly what I meant when I wrote that 12 years ago. If I tell you what I think I meant, it was less about that process and more about how Alice and I were trying to manage Paula. Paula was new in position. Paula was the managing director who had effectively presided over the very sharp deterioration in profitability. So she was the MD of POL in our MG group. And we needed to turn the business around in all sorts of ways, in revenue, in profit, in cost control, in everything. So Alice and I thought that the CEO and CFO that we had, Paula and Chris, were okay, but actually Post Office, in the mess that it was, needed somebody that was great. So pretty much every email that I wrote to Paula at that stage was encouraging her to grip things, get traction, keep control, make progress. So that isn't an unusual statement. It's basically saying you are the CEO, get control, drive things, manage things, lead things, get traction, make progress.
Well, the process here that's being referred to isn't anything to do with profitability, is it?
No, it's not.
It's
But
nothing to do with the matters that you referred to about the dip in profitability. This is to do with the process of the review of cases by a second side.
Sure.
In fact, what you were doing here, encouraging Ms. Venables to take control of the process to gain a favourable outcome for the Post Office?
Well, absolutely not. So Alice and I are encouraging second sight. We want second sight. I think Lord Arbuthnot and the MPs had been trying to get traction with the Royal Mail Group for some time. Alice is there going, I'm listening to you. I believe you. I want to find something. So we will appoint somebody. I am there absolutely supporting the appointment of somebody and actually, in my mind going, should it be second sight or should it be somebody better? So in no way, shape or form are we trying to not find things. We are trying to find things. We're trying to understand and to fix things. However, in any process, be it about profit or cost, or it's just leadership of the business. So I want the CEO to lead properly. And that means taking control of things.
Let's jump forward to when the interim report is about to be announced. Could we have poll 30's21515, please? So it's a board meeting on the 1st of July 2013. You're in attendance, you're present. If we can scroll down, please. We see it's about Horizon, and Paula Venables is raising and giving an update on the Horizon review. Do you have any now positive recollection of this meeting?
So from the minutes, is my only recollection of it. I think actually it wasn't a meeting about Horizon. I think it was a meeting regarding network subsidy, onto which Horizon was tacked on at short notice with no warning.
It says, give an update on the Horizon review, which is being undertaken by Second Sight, and their interim report, which was due to be presented at a meeting of MPs on the 8th of July. The investigation to date has found no systemic issues with the Horizon computer system, but had highlighted areas for improvement in support areas such as training. What did you understand systemic issues to mean?
I think I believed systemic issues to refer to the code, the software. So was there a problem with the software which would be a flaw in Horizon?
Were you told how many cases that Second Sight had looked at this stage?
At this stage, I don't think I was told. My understanding will have been that they had 47 cases that were in their remit. But I don't think on this call there was a conversation about cases.
Goes on to say the CEO explained that the Horizon, like any large computer system, would occasionally have anomalies, and two were known of over recent years. The business had dealt with these anomalies to ensure no sub-postmaster was out of pocket, and these anomalies had not affected any of the cases which Second Sight had reviewed. What did you understand or take from the word anomaly?
Again, memory vague, but I think that I will have taken that as being, I guess in my mind I will have likened it again to an iPhone release. Yeah, if there is an iPhone release and then some part of that doesn't link with some other part of the system, then that's a problem, a flaw. So I think a flaw.
Were you told anything about when the anomalies were discovered?
I cannot recall if that was conversed on this call. So again, just to stress, this phone call, I believe it was a board phone call.
Yes, it says that we don't need to go up, but it says at the top, held by conference.
Yeah, and it was about a totally different issue. So Horizon was just dumped on us in this phone call at short notice. So no papers and squidged on as an extra little piece. So my memory is that it was a very short update about Horizon on this call because the majority of it was about, I think, network subsidy. I might be wrong on that.
If we turn over the page, please. It said the CEO was concerned that the report from the independent forensic accountants was not as factual as expected and could lead to loose language at the MP meeting. The board asked the business to challenge Second Sight to ensure changes were made to the report where possible and asked the business to prepare their communication to combat any inaccuracies. Do you recall if any examples were given of the type of inaccuracy that the CEO was referring to?
I do not recall that. I would doubt if that was the case. So again, I'm sure that there were no written papers for this. This is Paula doing a short verbal briefing over a phone call.
And what was your view on that, the way it was presented to the board at this time, on what is clearly a significant issue?
I was upset. So I was upset that we were being told a week before the report was going to come out, that the report was going to come out. So I would have wanted, to understand. The board had asked several times, many times over the year, how was Second Sight getting on? So to have it dropped on us, not in a proper written communication, not at a proper board meeting with proper papers, but just to have it thrown in as an AOB to say, actually, Second Sight report is coming out next week, and we're not happy with it because it's inaccurate. And by the way, there are these bugs, flaws. I wasn't happy with that, and I don't think the rest of the NEDs were happy with that. It's not a good way to run the business of the board.
Did you discuss with Alice Perkins, Did you discuss with Alice Perkins your concerns as to how it was handled at this point?
I cannot remember if on that phone call I had that conversation. I am sure that the NEDs spoke a lot with each other, so I am sure that I and others did talk to Alice and talk to each other to say that we were unhappy with this process.
Can we look, please, at the interim report when it came out? It's poll 20130-412. I think your evidence is that you think you read this some point between the 8th of July and the 16th of July. Is that correct?
Correct.
If you turn to page 5, please. If you go a bit further down to the bottom. Thank you. So did defects in Horizon cause some of the losses for which sub-postmasters or their staff were blamed? And paragraph 6.4, in the course of our extensive discussions with Post Office over the last 12 months, Post Office has disclosed to Second Sight that in 2011 and 2012, it had discovered defects in Horizon Online that had impacted 76 branches. And then over the page, we see at 6.5 and 6.6, there are references to the number of branches and the affected and the quantum of the shortfalls and surpluses. And at 6.7, it says Post Office was unaware of this second defect until a year after its first occurrence in 2011. It reoccurred and an unexplained shortfall was reported by a sub-postmaster. Now, what were your views when you saw this information as to two defects that had caused shortfalls and gains in branch accounts?
Again, I'll tell you what I think I remembered, but my memory is inevitably a little bit vague, more than 10 years ago. I was not as worried as, with hindsight, I should have been when I read this. So we had been told by Paula that these anomalies, bugs, were not in any way linked with the cases that Second Sight were reviewing. Second Sight themselves, if you go to the conclusion of this paper, Second Sight say there are no systemic problems with Horizon. And then they in fact, is it possible to scroll down to the conclusion here?
Yes, it's page...
I think it's...
Page 8.
So we have so far found no evidence of system-wide systemic problems with the Horizon software. We are aware of 2 incidents where bugs or defects in the Horizon software gave rise to 76 being branches, which took some time to identify and correct. So I'm reading that, but it's not actually raising a huge red flag to me. So it is saying that there are bugs, but it's also saying to me that, it's underneath the main point, which is there are no systemic problems with Horizon. So I'm getting the impression from this, wrongly, with hindsight, but I'm getting the impression that we have found the bugs. Okay, one of them took time. They are not related to the 47 cases that Second Sight are reviewing. And in their report, they also say every system has bugs. It's inevitable. So it's probably an amber flag, but it wasn't a red flag to me.
Well, you had been dealing or aware of challenges to the integrity of Horizon since at least 12th January 2012. Do you agree?
Yes.
And as you say in your statement, you say you've been assured by various members of the business that data integrity wasn't an issue. You agree?
Yes.
Did it not concern you that during that time, members of the executive hadn't raised the fact that there were 2 bugs that affected 76 branches in circumstances where there were allegations of a lack of integrity in the system?
Yes, it did. So just to be clear on the answer. So I was not overly worried about the bugs. With hindsight, I should have been more worried, but the way that this was written and the way that it had been explained to us by Paula on the first and subsequently, it did not make me overly worried. What did make me worried is that we were only finding out about it at this stage. So I thought that the way that it was being communicated to the board was poor. The way it was launched on the board on that 1st of July phone call was, I think, unacceptable. And I wanted us to have a different relationship with the board so that we were told that, I wanted information to come to the board freely and quickly, and clearly it wasn't. So the way that it was communicated did worry me. The actual fact that we had 2 bugs did not worry me as much as it should have.
Was it not beyond that? And did it not cause you to, or do you think it should have caused you to be more questioning or distrustful of the information that was being provided to you by your executive?
So Second Sight are not saying that this is a big problem. I'm reading Second Sight report, and the thing that I'm getting from Second Sight report is that there are no systemic system-wide issues with Horizon, but there are significant issues with training, support, call centre, etc. And that was the main message that I got from Second Sight. It wasn't bugs are the issue. What I read Second Sight and understood was the issue is around not the code, not the software, but the support package around Horizon, which was inadequate and needed to be fixed. And I believe that. I mean, intuitively, that's also what I believed. As I had gone around to post offices, lots of sub-postmasters would say, it's not easy to use, it's clunky, it's not intuitive, your helpline isn't helpful. So as I read Second Sight's report, it resonated with me, and I thought, yeah, okay, I agree. And I agreed with their broadening definition of the Horizon system. So they were at pains to point out that, in their view, Horizon wasn't just about the code, the software, which I thought, yes, I agree. Horizon system should be a wider thing. It's about the user experience. So as I read the Second Sight report, which this document is about, my takeaway wasn't we have had 2 bugs that have been found and weren't responsible for the sub-postmaster losses. My takeaway from it was that the Horizon system, our old definition has been overly narrow. We need to broaden that definition, and we need to fix those things.
So that's probably a good time to take our first break as I'm moving on to a different topic. I know it's slightly early, but
No, that's fine, Mr. Stevens. What time should we resume?
11:05, please, sir.
Fine.
Thank you. Good morning, sir. Can you still see and hear us?
Yes, thank you.
I'll carry on. Mr. McCausland, we were looking at assurance and we got up to the interim report. I now want to look at assurance after that. So we'll take the chronology a little bit out of order, but stay on this same theme. I'm going to jump to March 2014. So at this point, for context, the mediation scheme is in full swing. Post Office Limited are conducting investigations into that, and there's the query of compensation. And we then have the linklaters advice in March, and I want to explore that and what came afterwards. Could we look, please, at your statement, page 62, paragraph 166? So 166, you're talking after the linklaters advice itself, but what you say is the linklaters advice appeared to share the board's view that that Second Sight's interim report did not adequately address this, and you're referring to getting to the bottom of whether there was any evidence to suggest Horizon was not working as it should be, particularly whether any weaknesses or points of malfunction had been identified. So in terms of your thinking following the interim report, is your position that the interim report hadn't disclosed anything? I think earlier you said it might have been an orange flag, nothing particularly concerning, but it hadn't given you in terms of bugs, but it hadn't given you assurance over whether there were, in fact, weaknesses or points of malfunction in the system?
So, personally, I actually felt after the second site interim report, I was pleased with it. I thought that we had found what the problem was. So there were, as we went into the mediation scheme and 150 people came into the mediation scheme, I thought to myself, okay, that's good. I mean, second site have identified that there is a problem with Horizon system, not the code, but the wider system. And 150 people have come into the mediation system to say, we have been affected by this, training, ATMs, support, helpline, whatever. And therefore, I was actually feeling quite good that we had identified what the issue was.
Pausing there, you were presumably aware that the people coming into the scheme included people alleging that the system had flaws?
Yes. Alleging that, yes.
And just taking what you say at 66...
Sorry, so I wasn't... All of the cases were individual and were confidential. So I wasn't aware of the individual cases, but my feeling was that the... and as we went through this, again, we were getting reports. So before we got to the March 14 date that you're talking about, the board would have had an update probably a couple of months before that saying, we have now investigated 74, I think it was, of the cases and not found anything in Horizon, but they are about the wider issue. So I wasn't aware of the individual specifics.
If I can just be clear here what you're saying. You're not aware of the specifics, but between the start of the mediation scheme and to March 2014, were you aware, as a matter of generality, that some of the applicants to the mediation scheme were alleging that discrepancies had been caused by problems in the Horizon IT system?
Inevitably, yes, but my understanding of that is the broader IT system. So I wasn't aware of any of the specifics, and my understanding was that as we were going through, we had a team of 20 people, trying to work their way through the individual case reports. And the message that we were getting back was that as they were being worked through, it was consistent with the second site interim report, i.e. that we could explain those things. Nowhere in those, I think, 74 reports was there an indication that there was a software or a bug problem.
When you're referring to the 74 reports, are you referring to the investigations conducted by Post Office Limited?
Yes.
I think it's simplest just to go to the advice at this point. If you go to poll 20107317, please. So this is the linklaters advice, 20th of March 2014. Now, before moving on to the substance, could you just turn to page 2, please? And paragraph 1.4, it says, absent such proof that Horizon is not working as it should, the Post Office should be able to recover losses which the Horizon records indicate are owing on an individual SPMR's account. If the Post Office is entitled to recover losses, then there can be no question of a consequential loss claim on the part of the sub-postmaster relating to their recovery. Alwyn Lyons gave evidence to the inquiry on the 21st of May 2024 to the effect that she thought that you would have thought this paragraph was good because the Post Office could put a lid back on the can of worms and pay very little. Does that fairly summarise what your views were of the mediation scheme at this point?
Absolutely not. So, and I think Alwyn's words were basically that I was the pragmatic one on the board, and I think.
When you say Alwyn's words, when are
so
you
you've just quoted Alwyn's evidence.
Yes.
Alwyn's evidence was she wasn't saying that's what I had said. She was saying that was her view of what I might have been thinking, but she was doing that on the basis that I was the pragmatic person on the board. I think actually exactly around that time, you have already disclosed to me an email from me to Paula, where I was the one actually suggesting that we should pay significant amounts of goodwill compensation. So I put an email to Paula in advance of a board discussion that says, this is growing and the potential bill to the post office is huge. We're at the moment saying that we're not going to pay consequential or goodwill payments of any scale. But actually, why don't we? Why don't we just say that the worst cases get 75k, medium 50k, 25k, doesn't matter how you do it. I think in the board meeting I actually doubled those figures. If you did that and paid a significant amount of compensation, then you might actually get out of this. So Alwyn, I think, is right in saying I was the pragmatic one, but I'm not the one. This isn't EBITDAS. So this is not sustainable profit. This is an exceptional cost. The post office has got 1.5 billion that it's trying to go through. If you spend 15 million, which was my suggestion, as goodwill payments, it's chicken feed. It's not an existential crisis. So, I'm actually the one, I think I was the only one, who was saying we should pay something if it will solve it.
So you disagree with the point I just put to you. We'll move on.
Yes.
Could we turn, please, to page 3, paragraph 2.3. Importantly, Joe Swinson, the Parliamentary Under-Secretary of State for Employment Relations and Consumer Affairs, noted that there was no evidence of a systemic problem with Horizon. This has also been the Post Office's conclusion on the information so far available to it. We note that there is, so far as we understand it, no objective report which describes and addresses the use and reliability of Horizon. We do think that such a report would be helpful, though there is a decision to be made about how broad and or thorough it needs to be. So, at this point, you referred to past sources of assurance you'd had, but you have linklaters now saying there's no objective report which describes and addresses the use and reliability of Horizon. Was that a surprise to you?
So, when we were having the original second site, the right people discussion, at that stage, there was a discussion about can you do a system review? Does the code exist? Is it possible to do that? And I think Second Sight had said to us that actually it would be a very difficult, almost impossible thing to do. And when we subsequently had Deloitte do it, they also said broadly the same thing. So a proper code-based review was almost impossible. And therefore, I don't think it was a total surprise.
Well, just opposing that, it doesn't say that there needs to be a code-based review, does it? It says that there isn't an objective report which describes and addresses the use and reliability of Horizon. Did you think that there was such a report, an objective report describing and addressing the use and reliability of Horizon before then?
Probably not. I don't think it was a surprise, no.
So did that strike you as troubling, given it's a few years down the line of dealing with these claims and there's no such report available to the Post Office?
Well, and the whole point of appointing Second Sight was to find the issues and find flaws. So if you go back to Second Sight's remit, they were there to actually go through the cases and find a flaw in Horizon. And their advice was, and we believed it, we agreed, that was the best way to do it. And Second Sight were doing a number of reports about the reliability of Horizon. So Second Sight were right then working on an interim report. Sorry, it wasn't they called it a Part 1 report, I think, which did describe Horizon and the way that it was being worked. So I mean, my understanding was that that was what we were using Second Sight to do.
Well, let's look onwards, please. Page 9, paragraph 530. It says it is the reliability of the Horizon system as a matter of principle which is important. If there are doubts about the reliability of the system, then this could obviously impact on the Post Office's ability to claim losses, since it calls into question whether such losses exist at all. This is the fundamental question and one which has not yet been satisfactorily addressed. Second Sight have not done what we would have expected them to in terms of an investigation into Horizon. The logical and obvious start for their work would have been a thorough review and description of how Horizon is supposed to work, its day-to-day use by the sub-postmasters, and in principle, identification of any weaknesses and likely points of malfunction. Now, posing there that what Second Sight have been asked to do is to look at individual cases, I think using your words, trace the money. Is that right?
Originally, but then that morphed. So then now, at this stage, Second Sight were doing their Part 1 and Part 2 thematic reviews, which were to some extent explaining how Horizon worked and where the points of weakness were.
But pausing there, by this stage, the reports you hadn't seen them or they hadn't been released?
Correct, yeah. We knew they were working on them, but they were taking a long time because Second Sight were trying to do a lot of things at the same time.
We see at paragraph 32, it refers to Second Sight being due to produce the generic report in due course.
Yeah.
At this point, having read this, did you think it was important to follow Linklater's advice and get an objective report that looked at the use and reliability of the Horizon IT system?
Yes, I did.
And that's why, presumably, Deloitte were subsequently commissioned?
Yes.
Can we look at the board meeting where that was discussed, please? It's poll 21523.
Sorry, can I make one comment about the Linklaters report?
Yes.
So it does also say in the Linklaters report that even absent such a report that Deloitte then turned out to be, Post Office still had good reasons to believe that the losses, that they should not be paying consequential losses due to the level of assurances that existed, such as ISAE 3402, such as Fujitsu, such as Gareth Jenkins and Ann Chambers. So they don't say, yeah, huge red flag, you shouldn't be doing this. They say, actually, you've got a lot of good evidence, but in addition, it would be really helpful to have Deloitte. And I absolutely agreed with that.
We've got the board minute here. It's 26th of March 2014. You're present. We also see in attendance 5 down Krista Band from Linklaters. If we go to page 2, please. We see, we don't need to go through it, but there's Ms. Band makes various criticisms of the Second Sight work. And at F, we see that at that point, the board thanked Krista for her report and Krista Band left the meeting. So presumably, in terms of reading these minutes, but just to confirm, everything from F down is without Krista Band being present.
I assume so.
We go to K. So the board agreed that they needed to commission a piece of work to complement that undertaken by Linklaters to give them and those concerned outside the business comfort about the Horizon IT system. Why did the board wish to obtain a piece of work to give it comfort about the Horizon IT system?
I think back in February, there had been a very large difference in the potential bill that the Post Office would be paying, ranging from 6 million to 100 million. And we internally on the board had some discussions. I was suggesting significant goodwill payments. Others were saying, no. The linklaters work basically said that the key determinant of that was going to be how robust we were with our belief that Horizon was not malfunctioning. And therefore, in the absence of Second Sight's work that they were still doing, it was going to be very sensible for us to actually have another piece of work.
So is there another piece of work to shore up the board's position, or an objective review to understand whether or not Horizon's data integrity is satisfactory?
And I mean, the board didn't really have a position. The board just wanted to get to the truth.
Well, it says if the board wanted to get to the truth, would it not say at K, the board decided to commission a piece of work which would be an objective investigation into the Horizon IT system and its integrity, rather than saying that it wanted to comfort about the Horizon IT system?
So that's a fine point of wording, and Alwyn wrote the words, but I can tell you that the people on the board, the Neds on the board, always just wanted to know the truth.
And
So there's absolutely no benefit for a Ned in trying to hide the truth.
so did that mean, for you, a report that described the Horizon IT system and commented on how it worked in practice?
Yes, and identified potential flaws.
We then look at, it refers to the terms of reference. First bullet point says, the work undertaken by Angela van den Bogart explaining how the system works. Can you help us with what that's supposed to mean, or why Angela van den Bogart is referred to in respect of these terms of reference?
So after the interim report from Second Sight, there were a number of work streams which came out of that. Working party, mediation scheme, lesson learned. But to me, probably one of the most important was the business support program, or the business improvement program, it's called both things, which basically took the Second Sight interim report findings and then tried to wash those through the business and fix things which were not correct. So it fixed the training, fixed the cultural issues, fixed the helpline, it fixed the way that it was suspended postmasters. So it did a lot of things.
The non-IT issues. Is that what that's referring to?
Yes, so it's not about, some of it I think it does touch on IT, but it's primarily the word cultural is a bad word, but if you understand what I mean by the cultural issues that are identified in the Second Sight interim report, I think that is what it means. And if you are going to describe the use of Horizon and articulate that in a document, then the work that business support program had done, I think, would be very useful as a start of 10 in that. So that's as I understand that.
So that's the business support program. We've then got 2 bullet points on data integrity issues. The final is a response to the most significant thematic issues raised by Second Sight. Why did an objective report or investigation need to include a response to the thematic issues raised by Second Sight?
I don't know, to be honest. I don't remember reading that or thinking about that last bullet point. And I don't remember any discussion about that last bullet point.
Just so we're clear, you say you don't recall it. Are you suggesting in any way that this might be inaccurate in terms of what was discussed or not?
No. I'm simply saying that I do not remember any conversation at that meeting after linklaters had gone, which was, and we need to have a response to the significant thematic issues.
Can we look, please?
I mean, it doesn't, in a way, it doesn't worry me. If you are getting somebody else to actually do a piece of work, I think it would be sensible for them to see the Second Sight work and to consider that, and either to validate or refute those issues.
Can we look, please, at poll 20148075? So this is a Project Sparrow subcommittee meeting. You weren't in attendance at this meeting, and I understand you didn't attend the subcommittee. Is that right?
Correct.
In your statement, page 46, paragraph 125, you refer to these minutes going to the board. Would you have read them?
Yes.
If we look, please, at page 4. And go down to the update on Horizon Online, HNGX, Horizon Assurance work. Point B, it refers to 2 parts. I'm not going to read it out because it's known well to the inquiry, but effectively, part 1 is a desktop-based review. And it says, you see at the end, the assessment of part 1 will not consider the integrity of the Horizon processing environment at implementation. That would form part 2 of the work. Then goes on to say, although no system could be absolutely bulletproof, no issues had yet been identified through the cases being investigated or any other route that has called into question the integrity of Horizon. Nor have any widespread systematic faults been identified since Horizon Online was implemented. These 2 points, along with the Part 1 work, depending on the results, should be sufficient to assure Post Office that Horizon is fit for purpose. Can you recall, firstly, can you recall reading this document when you received it?
I cannot recall reading it, but I'm sure that I did read it. The minutes of the subcommittees would have been in the board pack, and I would have read the whole board pack.
Did you discuss this approach to the Deloitte work with any of the non-executive directors?
I cannot remember discussing that. I think it is unlikely that I did. The way that the subcommittee minutes worked was generally they were in the board pack, and the chairman of the subcommittee would generally give a very short of the relevant subcommittee would give a very short description of what happened and take questions. But there was rarely a substantive discussion regarding the minutes of the subcommittees, of which there were many subcommittees. So I doubt that there was a substantive discussion about that.
Did you see any problem at the time with the plan not to commence or go forward with the Part 2 work?
No. I wasn't in the subcommittee. So can I just explain the way subcommittees work?
Well,
You know that.
We have that, how they work. But you would have read this, yes?
I would have read it. But
and you are there as a senior independent director to assist the Post Office with strategy.
Yep.
Yes. And part of that strategy is how the Post Office was to respond to claims about the integrity of the Horizon IT system, yes?
Yes.
And that was important not just for the applicants in the scheme, but for how the data in the accounts, the data that Post Office relied on to produce its account was prepared.
Yes.
So when you have a suggestion from linklaters that firstly there's no objective review into the integrity of the Horizon system, 2, that it's would be important to get, or it would be a good idea to get one, and the board has suggested getting one, why did you not see the problem with stopping at a desktop review?
I don't think it said stopping. It said that it was going to be a 2-part exercise. It's quite sensible. So it's quite sensible to break an exercise down into 2 parts. The first part being part 1, and see where you get to at part 1, and then take a view about part 2. We already know that we've already had conversations that part 2 is going to be potentially difficult because the data may not exist. It's very old, it's very disparate, and therefore part 2 may not be possible, and if it is possible, it may be very difficult. So to have it in a bite-sized chunk feels sensible now. It felt sensible at the time.
So in your view, at this point, it was Part 2 hadn't been written off. It was an open question to be assessed after Part 1.
Absolutely, yeah, and I think that it says it very clearly that the SSC have a task, which I think is in the minutes here, in the action points, that the SSC have a task to get the CIO to come along and talk about when and how and if are we going to do Part 2. So Part 2 is absolutely there as a scope, but the scope has been split into 2 parts.
I think I should just clarify one thing. When you say SSC, I assume you're referring to Sparrow Subcommittee.
Yes.
There's another SSC in this inquiry. That's why I just want to double check that.
Apologies.
No, don't need to apologise. Let's move on in the chronology. Poll 21524, please. So it's a board meeting on the 30th of April 2014. You're present, and if we can scroll down, thank you, we see at the bottom Gareth James of Deloitte is also in attendance. Can we turn please to page 6? If we go down please. So, subparagraph D, it says Gareth James reported that all the work to date showed that the system had strong areas of control and that its testing and implementation were in line with best practice. Work was still needed to assure the controls and access at the Finance Service Centre. Now, I think in your statement, but do correct me if I'm wrong, I think you criticise that this oral briefing on the work to date was incomplete or inaccurate.
Can I just ask, where are you taking that from?
Yes, if we go please to pay, if we could bring up the witness statement on the screen at the same time, and page 75. It says paragraph 2, if we could go to the bottom, please. Paragraph 200, I do not think that the board received the full Deloitte Project Zebra report. I do not know if the Barrow subcommittee saw it. You then say the board was given a somewhat misleading verbal briefing and an incomplete board summary, neither of which clearly exposed the serious problems that Deloitte had found. Now, the incomplete board summary is a reference, I'm sure, to the 4th June.
Yes.
And we're going to come to that in an email from Chris Oyard and Roderick Williams. When you say somewhat misleading verbal briefing, is that referring to, it's gone some on the screen,
yes.
sorry. Is that referring to the 30th of April board meeting?
Yes.
Okay. So if you could bring that board meeting back, please. It's poll 21524. Page 6, please. And just back down to D, please. So that's D is the paragraph I read out before. Now, do you have any independent recollection as to what was said at this meeting, or are you reliant on the minute?
I do not have any recollection of the meeting itself. I am reliant on the minutes. But I probably would have remembered it had I come out of the meeting with a big worry. and I do not remember coming out of that session with a big worry. And therefore, I think that I listened to Gareth James. He had the day before given a small document, but basically I came out of that session thinking, yeah, we're in pretty good shape.
So Alice Perkins gave evidence to the inquiry saying that she thought the board had the impression that Deloitte were going to be able to write a report, if you like, Horizon a clean bill, giving, if you like, Horizon a clean bill of health. Would you effectively agree with that?
Yes.
The work was still needed to assure the controls and access at the Finance Service Centre. You accept, presumably, at this point that it was an interim report, effectively?
Absolutely.
Now, if we look down, we may as well cover it while we're here. It says Chris Oyar explained that several sub-postmasters who were challenging Horizon had made allegations about phantom transactions which were non-traceable. Assurance from Deloitte about the integrity of the system records would be very valuable. That's presumably referring to the remote access issue, is it?
It is. And actually, phantom transactions was probably a phrase that was used more than remote access. But yes, it means the same thing.
So by this point, at least, you were aware of the allegations about remote access?
And specifically asking Deloitte in their investigation to try to understand, is there validity in that?
So it's an important matter, you thought?
Correct.
And then at F, we see the board asked what assurance could be given pre-2010 when the different Horizon system was in use. And it said Gareth James would go on to cost that up effectively. Why was the board concerned to look pre-2010 as well?
So the vast majority of the prosecutions took place before 2010 under Royal Mail Group, under Old Horizon. We understood that it was going to be difficult to get assurance because of the age and mainly because of the age. But if there was an opportunity to get assurance on Old Horizon as well as on Online Horizon, then that would be helpful and useful.
So you specifically mentioned there that in the board's processes or thinking when asking for the pre-2010 work, it was considering how that might affect past prosecutions.
I'm not sure that it was yes implicitly. I mean, we just wanted, at that stage, we weren't really thinking so much about the prosecutions. We were thinking about the integrity of Horizon. So the linkage to past prosecutions wasn't high in the mind. It was, so Deloitte were looking at what is the integrity of Horizon Online like. We also would like to understand, if we could, what was the Old Horizon integrity like.
But it was in the background and so presumably made this work all the more important.
Yes.
Can we look, please, at poll 20304159? And if we could go down, please, to Larissa Wilson's email. We see it's from Larissa Wilson. You are in the distribution list, 29th of April 2014. It says, so it's the day before the meeting we've just been for. Please find attached the draft report for item 6 attached. This paper will also be available on BoardPad and hard copies will be provided at tomorrow's meeting. Could we then look at the attachment to that, which is poll 20304160? I appreciate you've been given this document we're going to now this morning. So we see it's a Deloitte report, review of assurance sources, executive summary. I think behind draft it will say emerging findings at 29 April 2014. Do you remember having read this report, or do you remember receiving it?
I don't remember receiving it, although I don't doubt that I did.
If we turn the page, please, to page 2, I should make it clear you didn't have this report when you drafted your witness statement. Can you refer to a separate report around this point? So that's why I'm taking you to it now. Under overall comments, I'm not sure why the draft is appearing in front on this screen, but there we are. It says a significant amount of work has been performed. In fact, it may be better to come back to this at a later stage. Actually, we don't need that part. We can go and look at the bottom paragraph. It refers to our main recommendation for improvement in the assurance provision, therefore, would be for Post Office to extend the formal risk and control framework already in place for general controls, to also embrace key risks and controls holistically across the Horizon Online processing environment, for example, to include controls in specific risk and thus more operational areas of the business, such as the Finance Service Centre. So similar to what was said in the minutes that we just went through, yes?
Yes.
And if we go back slightly up, please, we see under overall comments, it does say, at the first paragraph, this work is comparable to that typically seen, it'll say, in other similar organisations. So if you had read, and you may not be able to recall reading it, if you had read this at the time, is that consistent with the feeling you remember of being reassured?
Yes. I mean, I do not remember reading this at the time. I'm sure I did read this at the time. But the combination of reading this and listening to Gareth James the following day at the board meeting will have not made me feel rosy and warm, and clearly there are things more to do, but not made me feel overly worried.
Thank you. That can come down. Sir, just so you know, the version on the system has the draft behind the text. So when you come to read it, we won't have the same difficulties. Could we please bring up poll 20105635? So this is a document to which you refer in your witness statement. If we go down slightly, please, we can see it. The Project Zebra Phase 1 report, content and key extracts, draft for validation in advance of board discussion on Wednesday, 30th of April. Now, Gareth James will give evidence to this inquiry in written form that said that this formed the primary basis of discussion for the meeting on the 30th of April. Do you, as you say, you refer to it in your statement, do you have any independent recollection of reviewing it now or not?
Again, I do not have a recollection of reviewing it, but if it was sent to me for a board discussion, I will have read it.
But you, for example, you can't assist with now whether this was in the boardroom at the time when the discussion was taking place?
I cannot. My instinct is that it was.
Could we look, please, at page 5? It's key matters for consideration, and you see on the left there's risk area, in the middle the matters for consideration, and on the right the nature of work done. If we could turn the page, please. We have 4 specific on the left, And on the right, it says other work only, no assurance work noted. And D, it says audit store. This records all transactional activity and certain key system events. Work we have seen performed on this store has been performed by Fujitsu and is not evidence-based, as the documentation provides a description of the process they have performed only. It is not clear from the documentation we have been provided whether 1. Post Office has agreed that the current capturing of certain key system events is complete and appropriate for potential governance and investigation needs, and 2. Investigatory work on the audit store has all been performed by Fujitsu, who, whilst technically qualified, do not constitute an independent nor experienced party for risk-driven assurance purposes, or what risk analytic tools were used for these purposes. And then if we go down to the key potential next steps, we have 2B, audit store testing for a key potential next step. An independent party should review and test the audit store functionality as described within the technical documentation provided by Fujitsu. This should include certain data analytic tests or on underlying audit store data to better understand, profile and examine the operation of the store, and potentially use historic characteristics of incidents and errors to analytically search for like characteristics and trends within the audit records. Do you recall that being discussed at the meeting, these key potential next steps and points raised about the audit store?
I do not recall the conversation at that meeting.
Can you assist us with what your understanding would have been of these issues if you can put yourself in the position of reading it at the time? So what would that have told you?
I think that it's basically saying that a lot more work needs to be done at Fujitsu, and just to understand how it works, get some independent, or get them to review it. So they're basically saying, we need to look more at the audit store. I think.
Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, at that meeting, this is the meeting, isn't it, where we're basically asking Deloitte to widen their scope. So we'd set up the Sparrow subcommittee had set up the terms of reference for Deloitte, agreed it with the linklaters, agreed it with the Sparrow subcommittee, got Deloitte started, got them started on a part 1, and then on the 30th at the board meeting, that scope was broadened a bit, which included phantom transactions, which undoubtedly would have been in Deloitte, in Fujitsu. And I think this is also saying that they should review and test the audit store functionality.
Irrespective of whether you don't remember reading it, I think do you recall anyone from the Post Office executive either briefing you or informing you about these suggestions in this document by Deloitte?
I don't, but to be honest, I wouldn't really have expected them to, in that the Deloitte work was within the Sparrow subcommittee, and therefore, had I been on the Sparrow subcommittee, I might well have, but I wasn't, and therefore the only notes that I saw at the time, and the only notes that the inquiry have given me, are the minutes of the Sparrow subcommittee. And as we talked about before, in the reading of the papers which would have gone to the Sparrow subcommittee and the hours that they spent, to condense that down to a few pages of minutes inevitably means that I am far less cited on that than people who were on the Sparrow subcommittee.
In your statement, you refer to this Phase 1 report and you say it did not raise any particular red flags with me, albeit I knew controls around the system needed improving. One thing I want to test is, you earlier said in your evidence on the 30th of April you came away feeling good about Horizon, or the work that it was being done in respect of by Deloitte.
So, I mean, I think I said I didn't feel warm and rosy,
No.
but I didn't have red flags. I didn't feel overly worried. So there was clear. So I came away feeling this is an interim report. We have already widened the scope.
Yes, I'm just trying to summarise where you are.
So I would have felt not warm and rosy,
Yes.
but not overly worried.
Let me just get to the question. That feeling you've described, do you think you would have had that feeling if these issues had been discussed on the 30th of April?
Yes, I don't think that those issues would have changed. So again, I'm not reading that to say, oh my God, I'm really worried. I'm reading that as to say more work needs to be done.
Yeah.
And more investigation is required, particularly in the audit store with Fujitsu.
Could we look to the product that was given to you, please? It's POL 3029733. And if we go, we see the email from Alwyn Lyons on the 4th of June. You're in the distribution list. It says, please see below the message from Chris Oyar and Leslie Sewell. Sorry, I earlier said Roderick Williams. It was Leslie Sewell who was joint on this. If we could turn the page, please, to see the... So we see, talks about the briefing, and it says, the briefing strives to be succinct and intelligible. However, given the subject matter and scope of the review, it remains somewhat technical. Furthermore, it's based on a desktop review of currently available information. It is therefore heavily caveated. In the briefing, Deloitte expressly identify a number of limitations and assumptions which underpin the findings. The briefing must be read in this context. That said, its key findings are... I'm not going to read those out because I understand you've read that summary.
Yes.
Can you just explain what your view was of the Deloitte work, or what you took from this summary?
From the summary or from the...
From the summary.
From the summary, I took that... I took this as a good affirmative report saying that Horizon was in good shape. So I did not feel overly worried when I read the summary.
Did you acknowledge or understand from the summary what the limitations were? What did you think they were?
Sorry, so when...
In the summary, what did you...
Yeah.
How much weight did you think you could place on this report from the summary based on the described limitations?
Okay, so let me just be clear. So when I read this email, so there's an email from Chris, and then there is the report from Deloitte. When I read the email from Chris, I felt good in that the email was basically saying Fujitsu Horizon is in good shape. When I read the board summary, which was the condensed version of the full report, I felt less good. It wasn't an easy read, and I don't have a vivid memory of this, but my memory of it is that I felt less good, and I thought that there were some questions which still needed to be answered in that board summary.
What were the questions that you thought still needed to be answered from the board summary?
So again, my memory is not complete. I'm trying to remember back more than 10 years ago here, but I do remember that in one of their matters, which with hindsight I can tell you is matter 3, it basically says that they have not found documented controls which give Horizon the protection that it should have. So there were questions around that definitely needed to be answered. And that wasn't how I read the email. And so there were two things in my mind. First of all, the email is overly positive. And secondly, the report itself still has some questions to answer.
I was going to turn to the report, but let's just pick up on that first. Did it concern you that the summary email was positive in comparison to what you took from the report itself?
Yes. Again, so I'm trying to remember back 10 years, so I have not got a particularly clear memory of it, but I do remember feeling a disconnect between the email and the report.
Did you do anything about that?
I cannot remember. I mean, if I felt a disconnect, it's likely that I would have, but I cannot remember what I did.
Well, let's look at the report, please. It's Poll 201300618. And if we could turn to page 3. Now, you've clearly read this report, the inquiry's seen it, so I'm not going to go in it in any detail, try to summarise it. At the start, we see that Deloitte say this didn't constitute audit or assurance engagement in accordance with UK or international standards. And then when we go to 3, the limitations and assumptions, a desktop-based exercise, significant gaps existing in the information available. The last bullet point, we have not validated or commented on the quality of the documentation supplied to us. And then over the page, the assumptions includes at the bottom, assertions made by Post Office Limited and Fujitsu staff have been accepted as accurate without corroboration or verification. So, taking that together, is this a fair summary of the Deloitte work? They reviewed documents on how Horizon worked and assumed they were accurate.
Yes.
Yes. They hadn't tested whether the processes described within the documents had been implemented.
Yes.
And where there were gaps in documents, they may have spoken to Fujitsu and Post Office staff, and where they have spoken to Post Office and Fujitsu staff, they would have accepted what they said as accurate without corroboration or verification.
Yes.
That didn't really meet the form of objective, independent review that linklaters were suggesting. Would you agree with that?
Yes.
And did you acknowledge that at the time?
So at the time, I felt that this was a unsatisfactory piece of work in that there were lots of limitations. It wasn't a particularly easy or clear read. It was giving us some assurance, but there was a lot of areas that still needed to be followed up.
Pausing there, when you say it's giving you some assurance, this was doing no more than pulling together and summarising other sources of documentation and pre-existing assurance work. Would you agree with that?
It was desktop exercise using existing documentation. But we knew that's what part 1 was going to be. So what they were not going to do was to go through and look at all the code in Horizon. So it's really all that they could do.
So this hasn't really given any new or independent assurance to the position before the linklaters advice. Would you agree with that?
No.
How is it given, if it's a desktop report that is looking at other assurance documentation, how does that give you?
Because I hadn't seen all the other assurance documentation, so there were definitely things in this report which had not previously been brought to my attention. So I learnt things in reading this. So I accept that the business may have had all of that information, but I'm not sure that it had been pulled together in a way. So if you go back to what linklaters were saying, document the linklaters were suggesting that we had somebody actually go through the design of Horizon and its use. So inevitably, that is going to be using existing documentation.
So is this going back to the original point I put to you earlier, that what was being sought here was a document that collated existing assurance to use in the mediation scheme rather than a true independent investigation itself?
I don't think this was to use in the mediation scheme. I think this was to actually understand for ourselves the integrity of New Horizon Online.
If we go please to page 7. Or just some of the, matter 3, baskets of transactions recorded to the audit store are complete and digitally sealed to protect their integrity and make it evident if they have been tampered with. And then just scrolling further down, it says, we have not identified any documented controls designed to prevent a person with authorised privilege access from deleting a digital sealed group of data and replacing it with a fake group within the audit store. I think this is what you were referring to earlier as something that you recall being concerned by. Is that right?
Yes.
If we turn the page, please, to look at matter 5. Matter 5 is Horizon provides visibility to sub-postmasters of all centrally generated transactions processed to their branch ledgers, and we see 3 balancing transactions. Do you remember if that caused you any concern at the time?
I honestly cannot remember if I, at the time, was concerned by that. I do remember concern about the document. I remember concerns that the email was too positive, and I remember the matter 3. I may well also have been concerned about that, but I honestly cannot remember.
Well, looking at it, what it says is, firstly, Fujitsu can create transactions in branch ledgers, yes?
Yes.
And Post Office said that that was visible to sub-postmasters.
Yes.
But, of course, Deloitte hadn't been able to test that, just assumed it was true. Fujitsu claimed it had only been used once, that hadn't been tested, and there was no knowledge of its use before 2008. You know, we saw in the minutes of the board on the 30th of April that remote access or phantom transactions, as you referred to it then, was a core issue. Surely this would have set off alarm bells for you.
I think that, so even when I read through this, I'm still of the impression that a change is visible. So if a change is made, that if I then follow the flow of information, either through the central database or through the audit store, that is a visible transaction. The one issue that I think did worry me is the matter 3, where it said, you know, I haven't seen any documented controls about this, and if, then there's a risk. So I absolutely would say, okay, so you know, are there documented controls that you just haven't found? Are there people who have all that relevant access? So questions that needed to be answered. But if they're answered, then I'm still of the understanding that it is visible. This doesn't say, and actually previously Gareth James said, all transaction corrections are visible, which is why he thinks it will be quite easy to actually do the validation. That was in the board meeting. So the fact that it is visible, I think, reassured me.
Can I just, when you, I can't see the transcript now. When you said what Gareth James said to you about transactions being visible, what words did you use? Transaction, and then what was the one that followed?
So, Chris Ojard, I think it's in the minutes of the board meeting.
Just to clarify your evidence on what you said Gareth James said about transactions.
So Gareth James, it is recorded in the minutes that Gareth James said to Chris Ojard, who reported it to the board, that because transaction corrections are visible, it would be easy for him to do his work.
So at the time, did you have in your mind the difference between transaction corrections and what I just took you to in matter 5, which was a balancing transaction? Do you understand the difference between them?
At the time, I don't think that I was probably sufficiently aware of the difference between them. But I still had a underlying belief that any change would be visible.
So, based on this desktop report, I think, did you accept that it left a lot of questions unanswered.
Yes.
Why was this report not discussed at the board?
So the board meeting, well, it was never due to be discussed at the board.
Well,
Sorry,
can you explain why that was? Because
so let me answer your question. So it wasn't ever due to be discussed at the board. It was due to be discussed at the Sparrow subcommittee meeting. And actually, that's the right place for it. This is a very detailed piece of work. The Sparrow subcommittee had commissioned it. They'd done the terms of reference for it. They had been involved in it on the 9th of April and 30th of April meeting. And we, the board, had been told late May that it was going to be considered at the Sparrow subcommittee meeting. And when the email came out from Chris on the 4th, it also said it would be considered at the Sparrow subcommittee meeting. It wasn't due to be considered at the board. It would be a pointless thing to set up a Sparrow subcommittee, get them to be spending lots of time understanding it, and then for the document to be considered at the board.
Well,
the Sparrow subcommittee is the right place for it to be considered.
Pausing there, the board had brought Gareth James in for an interim presentation on where Deloitte was, correct? Yes?
Yes.
So the board at that point obviously thought that it was sufficiently serious or important to go over with Mr. James his report findings to date, correct?
Yes.
The subcommittee, as you say, can consider the report, but the fact the subcommittee considers it doesn't stop the board also considering it as well, does it?
But the subcommittee should consider it first,
Okay.
in far more detail than the board would consider it.
But why, when we've discussed what your views were on the report, why was this never brought back to the board for a discussion of what's happening next? What are we doing?
So it should have been. I cannot tell you exactly why it wasn't. My view is that it should have been considered by the SSC in detail, and then a summary of that should have been articulated to the board. And I do not think that either of those things happened with hindsight.
Well, was it not brought back to the board because the board didn't want to delve into the unanswered questions and know the answers?
Absolutely not. The board, the NEDs, not once in all my time there did the NEDs not want to get to the truth. Not once did they avoid a difficult conversation or an uncomfortable truth. There is no benefit for a NED in doing that, and there was no behaviour that I saw from any of the NEDs that did that. So, absolutely not. I cannot explain to you why it was not considered at the SSC, and I cannot explain to you why it was not brought back to the board.
Because again, just looking here, we've had a Magic Circle firm give written advice, a Magic Circle partner go to the board and talk on that advice, a decision made to commission some work. The work is commissioned by Deloitte. The Deloitte partner comes to the board and talks about it. This is then sent to the board, and then it appears from your evidence that it just dropped off everyone's radar. Why didn't you ask any questions of or follow up on this with even outside the board with Paula Venables?
So it was clear from both the SSC on the 31st of May and also from the email that came with the report on the 4th of June. Both of them were very clear that this would be considered by the next meeting of the Sparrow subcommittee. I 100% think that is the right place for it. The Sparrow subcommittee has got the chairman of the audit committee, the shareholder representative, the CEO and the general counsel. So you have the 5 perfect people to do that. Two of those are accountants, you've got legal skills, you've got better IT skills than the rest of the board. So the Sparrow subcommittee have got the expertise and the time to review, ideally not just the board summary, but the full Deloitte report.
Could we...
So that
stopping you there. Stopping you there, Mr. McCausland. The obligation, I'm calling it obligation because you said that it should have been considered subsequent to that Sparrow subcommittee meeting. Who bore the obligation to ensure that it was discussed? Tell me how it would work in practice. Who should have, in effect, insisted on a discussion by the subcommittee?
So the agenda for the subcommittee, I think, would have been created by Alice with help from Alwyn, who,
Right.
as company secretary, would determine all agenda. There are action points from the previous subcommittee saying that the report would be considered at the next meeting of the Sparrow subcommittee. So that's how it should have been on the agenda for the next meeting of the Sparrow subcommittee.
So there was a failure. I'll summarize it, then you then say whether you agree. As I see it, there's a failure in process in ensuring that it's not on the agenda for the next meeting. But then there's a collective failure of the 5 people who form that subcommittee, nonetheless, to ensure that they discuss it. Is that fair?
That is fair.
Fine.
Thank you. So that actually was my next set of questions. So it's probably a
Well,
good
I'm
time.
very sorry, Mr.
Good.
Stevens. I just thought that I wanted it clear while it was in my head.
Yes, no, I'm always glad when you ask questions before me. So on that basis, it's probably a good time for the break because I'm going to move on to a different topic.
Fine. All right. What time shall we resume?
25 past, please, sir.
Fine.
Thank you. Sir, can you see and hear us?
Yes, thank you.
I'm going to go on to a different topic, Mr. McCausland. Now, I'm going to ask now about both the Clark advice and the review of disclosure to sub-postmasters who had been convicted. I'm later going to ask you about the oversight of prosecutions and ongoing prosecutions. At the minute, I'm just limiting to convictions themselves.
Okay.
Could we please bring up poll 30-99026? And it's an email from Paula Venables to you on the 6th of July 2013. So we're back in the chronology after the board meeting where the upcoming second site report was discussed, which we went to earlier, but before the report had actually been received. And I don't need to go through all the summary, if we can turn the page, please, and go to the bottom of page 2. It says, one of the main reputational and potentially financial risks arising from the review relates to possible attempts to reopen past prosecutions based on the findings. James Arbuthnot was certainly focused on this. We had a stronger exchange on this point. It is not clear that any new evidence has emerged. If it does, then, as I pointed out to James, legal routes to appeal already exist. Susan and the legal team are working with our external lawyers to consider whether there are any implications arising from the report for past cases, and we can provide a further update on this work next week. Do you remember when the issue of past prosecutions, as to use Ms. Vendel's words, being reopened? Do you remember when that was first drawn to your attention?
At this stage.
And what did you make of that?
Interested to know more. I mean, to be honest, at that stage, I knew very little about prosecutions. Didn't know much about civil versus criminal. Didn't really understand that we did our own prosecutions, and didn't really understand what it was in the second site review which would lead to past prosecutions being reopened, and therefore read it and went, interesting, keen to know more.
That can come down, thank you. We're going to turn in a moment to the board meeting on the 16th of July 2013, at which you were not present. you received the interim report on the 8th of July and read it at some point before that board meeting.
Yes.
Do you recall having a discussion with either a non-exec or a member of the executive about this issue of past prosecutions following receipt of that email, but before the 16th of July board meeting?
I don't think that would have prompted it. When there was a paper which came out on the 12th of July from Susan, which did talk about wrongful prosecutions, and I would have had a conversation with Alice about the board meeting. So I will have read the board papers cover to cover, and I will have had a conversation with Alice about anything which I wanted to bring up at the board meeting. I honestly cannot remember if wrongful prosecutions were there, but I would guess that they were.
Was this to that point in your career, a unique moment dealing with past prosecutions?
Absolutely, yes.
But you can't assist us at all with what you might have discussed with Alice Perkins?
I cannot. When I read the minutes of the board meeting and when I spoke to, I remember reading, with hindsight, just to be clear, when I read the minutes of the board meeting, which I was not at, I was not surprised by the questions and the discussion about wrongful prosecutions and was anybody implicated. So I would not be at all surprised if I had I know I would have had a conversation with Alice, and I would not have been surprised if in that conversation I would have been worried about the concept of wrongful prosecutions, because it absolutely would have been unique. I've never been involved in anything like that before, so I will have gone, woof. And the concept of who is responsible and is there responsibility on the board, absolutely that would have been a concern for me.
I would have turned to the minutes in a moment. The inquiry has heard evidence about that meeting and that Susan Crichton was intended to speak to a paper that she produced. I think you referred to it already, the 12th of July paper, but was kept out of the meeting, sat on the other side of the door by Alice Perkins, and it was Paul Reynolds who spoke to the paper. Were you told about that after the meeting by any of the non-executive directors?
I cannot remember, but I would guess that Alice would have briefed me about the pre-board meeting that took place with the non-execs, and about the fact that Susan didn't come into the meeting. So I would guess that Alice did talk to me about that, because we would have had a thorough pre and post brief, but I honestly cannot remember the content of that conversation.
So you can't assist us with the reasons for why, at the time, Alice Perkins made that decision to keep Susan Crichton out of the room?
I'm afraid that I can't, no.
Do you consider that decision to be, from your experience of how these meetings were run, do you consider that to be an unusual decision to keep Susan Crichton out of the meeting?
Yes, I do. It absolutely would be usual and normal for the people who were on the agenda to turn up. I cannot remember another instance where, no, maybe I can, but if something really overran, sometimes an agenda item would slip to the next board meeting. But it would be very rare for that to happen.
Did you speak to Susan Crichton about the decision to have her excluded from the meeting?
I did not.
Could we look, please, at the minutes? It's poll 30275514. We see it's the 16th of July 2013. You're noted there as apologies for absence. If we go over the page, please. Sorry, if we could go... oh, no. Apologies. Can we go to page 6, please? So the CEO explained that although the second site report had been challenging, it had highlighted some positive things as well as improvements, improvement opportunities. Then at B, it says the board were concerned that the review opened the business up to claims of wrongful prosecution, and the board asked if Susan Crichton, as General Counsel, was in any way implicated. An explanation is given there. Either before the meeting or shortly after it, were you given any information about the number of wrongful prosecutions that the legal team thought they may or may not have been? I'll rephrase the question.
Yeah.
Did anyone explain to you the extent of the risk, or in terms of the numbers that they were fearing there may be wrongful prosecutions for?
Yes. So I can't remember if it was in which piece of paper, but around that time, I was informed by Susan that, in her view, or in the view of the external lawyers assisting her, it would be maybe 5% of the 100, 5% of cases. So in 5% of cases, I think was the figure that was used.
What was your view of that risk? How serious did you think it was?
Yeah, I mean, so it doesn't matter how many, what percentage. I mean, if there's one, then that's serious. So I would have been worried about wrongful prosecution.
So was this an issue, an important issue that the board needed to grapple and maintain oversight of?
Yes.
And just to be clear, because at various points in the chronology we see subcommittees being made, there was no subcommittee created to look at the past prosecutions, was there?
No.
Was this considered to be a matter for the full board itself?
Yes. At this stage, there was no Sparrow subcommittee.
If we look down, just to cover one point before carrying on with this theme, it says C, the board expressed strong views that the business had not managed the second site review well and stressed the need for better management and cost control going forward. Is that something you'd discussed with Alice Perkins before the meeting?
I'm not sure if I did specifically, but I shared that view that the second site review had taken too long, was taking too long, and the way in which the second site review had been sprung upon the board, partly with Paula talking about it in the margins of another meeting on the 1st, and then a very short period of time before it was launched. And it just felt like it hadn't been a well-managed process. It felt like we, Post Office, were disconnected from what Second Sight were doing.
That can come down, thank you. The day before this meeting, we now know that the Clark advice had been prepared, the 15th of July, the 2013 Clark advice. You've read that with the part of the documents that were provided to you by the inquiry, haven't you?
I have. You
say at paragraph 110 of your statement that you were unaware of the existence and or contents of Simon Clark's advice of 15th July 2013 prior to receiving it as part of the disclosure pack provided by the inquiry in relation to my Rule 9 request. And elsewhere in your statement, paragraph 199, you say, I do not believe that I was told that the reason that we could no longer use Gareth Jenkins was because he had been discredited.
Yes, correct on both counts.
look at your statement, please, at page 68, paragraph 181. So I've taken you here before. It's referring to the sources of assurance or reassurance for the Horizon IT system. If we could turn over the page, please. Continue a bit further down, please. Thank you. So on the screen, the third bullet point down says, by Fujitsu and their expert witness who would regularly give evidence in court under oath about Horizon's reliability, which resulted in convictions. Presumably there you're referring to Gareth Jenkins.
Yes, I did not know Gareth Jenkins' name for much of the time, but yes, I was aware that Fujitsu put up an expert witness who would defend the system.
When did you become aware of that?
I think probably around this time.
When you say this time, sorry?
Summer of 13.
Summer of 13. So the interim report comes out on the 8th of July. There's the 16th of July board meeting, and you think at some point in between there you have a conversation with Alice Perkins. Do you think it's around then or later?
Yeah, I don't think it will have been with the conversation with Alice Perkins, but it was around that time that I learned that we could no longer use the expert witness who we had. I'm not sure that I was aware that his name was Gareth Jenkins, but I was told that, and it wasn't specifically told, I mean, it was in a document that we needed a new expert witness.
Okay. We may come to a document like that in a second, but let me clarify this. You say it was in a document. Did anyone discuss with you the use of expert evidence orally?
No, not that I can recall.
That document can come down, thank you. Following the 16th of July 2013 board meeting and this discussion of a review of past prosecutions, I'm using a very loose term there on purpose, what were you told about the nature of that review or look back at past prosecutions?
Sorry, so just to clarify, are you talking about the SIFT review?
I want to know, from the 16th of July onwards,
Yeah.
when you were told about a review of past prosecutions, what you were told that review would entail.
So around I think it was mentioned in the 12th of July letter, and then it was mentioned in subsequent letters, in subsequent minutes, that Susan Crichton had commissioned an external firm, which I think she specified as Cartwright King, to do a review of past prosecutions and to ascertain what needed to be disclosed to those past, to understand if we needed to disclose the second sight review to those past prosecutions. At a subsequent time, Brian Altman also then got added into that as an independent review of Cartwright King.
Could we look, please, at poll 20145-891? And could we turn to page 3, please? Right at the bottom. Could we go further down, please? So if we scroll up, please. Scroll up, please. Thank you. And scroll up just as. Yeah, thank you. That's it. Sorry, disorientated myself. It's an email from Alistair Marnock to Alwyn Lyons on the 27th of July 2013. We see you're copied in. If you go down, please. So for the benefit of other board members, I had a very good review with Susan and Alwyn earlier this week, focused mainly on the history and immediate actions we are taking to dealing with the urgent case review. And then it says, in our discussion with Susan, Alwyn explained why the case review was only going back to 2010 and the significance of a horizon upgrade, full reconciliations across every site. Could Alwyn please elaborate on this point, as a critical issue will be determining how far back we need to go? Do you recall any discussion firstly on the choice of start date for the review?
I do not know. It is the choice of start date is referred to in several emails, and I'm conscious that Alistair had been asked by Alice to do this. I think that's in a previous minute. So Alistair is having a conversation, and Alistair is talking to Susan and Alwyn about the choice of start date, but I don't remember being involved in any of those conversations myself. I was aware of it.
Did you, outside of this email, did you discuss with either Alistair, Susan Crichton or Alwyn Lyons any of the issues raised in that email?
I don't believe that I did. I certainly had a conversation with Alice regarding these issues, but I cannot remember having a conversation with Alistair, Alwyn or Susan.
When was the conversation with Alice?
It will have been when I was back from France. I cannot tell you the date. I mean, I'm guessing sometime after the 16th of July.
Do you recall what was discussed in that conversation with Alice Perkins?
Really a summary of what happened at the board meeting and at the breakfast meeting. Again, I cannot recall the content of it, but it will have been going through the board meeting and her take on the various discussions in it. So it won't have been very different from the minutes.
If we can go up the page, please. We see there's an email from Martin Edwards with a different note. If you can carry on going up, please. There's an email from Alice Perkins there, which we will probably come back to later on. If you can carry on going up. Susan Crichton emails you on the 7th of August 2013. Says, Neil, please let me know if you would like to discuss this issue or want an update, and I will put some time in the diary when you are next in the building. Your reply is, thanks very much, Susan. I think I'm up to date and understand the issues, so probably no need for a special update. Why did you feel at this point it was not important to talk to Susan Crichton about the criminal case review?
Because I believed that I was up to date. I would have had a conversation with Alice. So Susan isn't saying, Neil, I've got some really important information I need to share with you. Susan's saying, please let me know if you would like to discuss this issue or want an update. So I didn't want an update. I was up to date. Now, clearly, with hindsight, I would have loved to know that Gareth Jenkins had been discredited, that we had the Helen Rose Lepton report, that the Clark advice had come out, which had put a fundamentally different spin on things. But that wasn't what she was saying. She was saying, do I want an update and would I like to discuss? I believed I was up to date, and I was very happy to wait until the next board meeting or the next time that she was going to update the board.
And just so we're clear at this point, so your email is on the 13th of August. We've discussed the sources of your information as being, firstly, the 12th of July paper from Susan Crichton,
Yes.
1 or 2 conversations with Alice Perkins,
Yes.
the email below from Alistair Marnock.
Yes.
There's a paper which was in your pack and Martin Edwards refers to that paper.
Yes.
Were there any other sources of information you had at that point on the status of the review?
Not that I can recall.
That can come down, but could we go please to Poll 3030900? This is a meeting of the Audit, Risk and Compliance Subcommittee to be held on 11th February 2014, and we see these are the papers for that. It says agenda in the top left, and if we turn to the second page, please, we see it's a prosecution policy paper. We don't need to go there, but take it from me, it was signed off by Chris Oyard. Could you turn to page 4, please? Paragraph 4.5 says it should be noted that although Post Office is still currently able to bring cases where the evidence concerned is extracted from the Horizon system, there is a strong risk that in such cases a defence will be mounted to the effect that the Horizon system cannot be relied upon. We have been advised that in these cases there is a strong likelihood that such a defence will be successful, at least until such time as a new independent expert is identified and has familiarised himself with the system. This is likely to take around 12 weeks and cost up to £200,000. Was that the document you were referring to earlier where you said that you learnt that the expert couldn't be used in future, or did you learn at an earlier point?
I think I had learnt it at an earlier point. I can't quite remember, but I think that I knew it already by that stage.
This is saying, admittedly it's in the context of whether prosecutions are pursued full stop, but it's saying at the moment there can't be we need to find a new independent expert, and that may cost up to £200,000. Did you ask in February 2014 or before why you couldn't use the expert who had provided evidence in past prosecutions?
So at that time I did not ask, but my memory is that I had been told previously that the old Fujitsu expert had moved on,
Okay,
and therefore couldn't be used.
Sorry, just so this is important, please. Who told you that?
I cannot remember. I'm guessing. I cannot remember. But my mind has it that somebody told me that the old Fujitsu expert had moved on, but told me in such a way that I didn't particularly think, oh my God, he's been discredited. I thought he's retired, resigned, gone to work somewhere else. We needed to find someone new.
So your evidence is it was more of a practical matter. The old expert's gone. We need to find someone else.
Yes. There's certainly absolutely no hint that the expert had been discredited. So that was 100% not known by me or the Neds.
It's quite a significant point. Can you assist even with when it's likely that was said? Was this at February 2014 or summer of 2013? Or in between, I should say.
I'm pretty sure that I didn't know it when the second site interim report came out in the summer of 13, and I'm pretty sure that I did know it when this paper was reviewed by the ARC. As to when it was between summer and February 14, it's somewhere in that period, but I honestly cannot tell you when it was. Very happy to.
As we'll turn to, we'll come to this later on in your evidence, there was a discussion on the future prosecutorial role of Post Office in November 2013.
Yes.
Could it have been around then?
Yes, absolutely. Yes, I mean, that was the precursor for this conversation. So the first meeting, the ARC in November, deliberately didn't make a decision. We needed more information, which came to this meeting of the ARC. So I would have been very surprised if I didn't know about it in the November 13 ARC meeting, because it would have been very relevant to that. But I have a feeling I didn't learn about it in the ARC. I have a feeling I learned about it in some different way.
So you don't think it alerted in the ARC, audit risk and compliance meeting, you think it was probably before November 2000, at or before November 2013. What other way do you think you may have been told of that information?
Either through Susan or Paula or Leslie, probably at a board meeting. That's probably that's the most likely way.
You say, we don't need to bring it up, page 71, paragraph 186 of your statement. It has subsequently become clear that I was not provided with or made aware of Simon Clarke's appointment or the reports he provided. That is wholly unacceptable. However, I do not regard this as a lack of oversight on my part. I cannot have oversight of matters of which I have no knowledge. Can you assist us with what you would have done if you read the report when you were Senior Independent Director?
So if I go back to the interim second sight report, I was, as I've said before, pleased that we seemed to be finding some reasons for the unexplained losses. And that gave us something to do, frankly. So we got into the working party, the mediation scheme, the business support program. We then reviewed past prosecutions, but we reviewed them in the context of, is there something in the second sight report which should be disclosed to those past prosecutions? Had at that time I'd been told Gareth Jenkins is discredited as a witness and has been giving false evidence, the Helen Rose report and the Simon Clarke really very clear report basically saying a serious risk of wrongful prosecutions, then I think we would have approached the subsequent period very differently. So we went into that subsequent period thinking that there was that we needed to disclose information to a small number of past prosecutions, and we were disclosing the second sight evidence. Yeah, that was my understanding. That was what we were told. So the reason for reviewing the past prosecutions was the second sight report. The real reason, as I understand it now, is that we had been using a tainted witness, and we had a serious risk of wrongful prosecutions. And therefore, the Simon Clarke advice, coupled with the Gareth Jenkins information, clearly they're linked, I think would have absolutely made us take a very different tack.
In terms of what actually happened, what recollection do you have of how the board oversaw the review and conducted oversight of it from August onwards?
So we were clearly concerned, as the minutes from the July board meeting show. We were concerned about wrongful prosecution, and we were concerned about that in a number of different ways. We were concerned, clearly, the very fact that we're doing wrongful prosecution and the impact on those individuals. We were concerned from a company's point of view because that exposed us to financial risk, reputational risk, legal risk. We were concerned from an individual point of view, who was doing that. So we were concerned about a lot of different aspects, and therefore we wanted we wanted more than just Susan, because Susan might be implicated, and therefore we wanted a legal firm to do that. And we also then wanted somebody else, which is where Brian Altman came in, to review the fact that we were reviewing it. So effectively, we were trying to get 2 layers of assurance.
Were you aware
General Counsel, Cartwright King.
Were you aware that Cartwright King had been involved in conducting prosecutions for Post Office at the time when they were instructed?
No. Wasn't. It wasn't. I was not aware of that. That link hadn't been made. I mean, I don't know if I had ever previously seen a piece of paper that said Cartwright King were doing criminal prosecutions, but I certainly didn't put those 2 things together.
In your statement, you refer to the advices of Brian Altman, KC. Were you provided with any of those notes of advice?
Sadly not. Again, with hindsight, I understand that Brian Altman also referred to other things that weren't brought to our attention. We were basically given a very anodyne, positive report to say that Brian Altman said that our approach was sound, which again, with hindsight, is not correct.
Without hindsight now, that's what I want to look at. Do you think the board, when presented with such a serious issue, should have requested to see the notes of advice of Brian Altman, of which it was aware?
So with hindsight, I wish we had. At the time, if I have the general counsel of the company saying something to me, backed up by an external law firm, backed up by a KC, frankly, I'm not expecting the general counsel to be lying or misleading me.
So I'm going to go into a different topic, so it's probably a good time to stop there for lunch. I don't have much more to go. There's a few questions from core participants, but I don't think it would merit working through lunch at this stage.
Oh, that's fine, Mr. Stevens. Mr. McCausland, I want you now just to answer this question from your general experience as a non-executive director, and therefore what you would expect to happen as a non-executive director of a company like the Post Office. Can you think of any good reason why the substance of Mr. Clark's advice, even if not the actual advice itself, would not have been discussed at board level?
I cannot think of any good reason, sir. I think under any circumstance of any board that I have served on, I would have expected that information to have come to the board and to be rigorously and in a very untainted way laid out in front of the board. If I'm honest, sir, I think the bit about Susan being left outside on a chair is a bit of a red herring. It's clumsy. It shouldn't have happened, but it is Susan's job as General Counsel to inform the board of hugely relevant pieces of information, which, as I've said, I fundamentally believe would have changed the way that we operate. And for those pieces of information not to have been disclosed. And it's not a case of doing it on a phone call. I mean, it's a very important piece of paper which should either have been in her board report or sent around with as a note or sent around on a phone call. We arranged board meetings and board information very regularly. And for those pieces of information not to have been shared, I think it's wrong. And subsequently, I don't think those pieces of paper, that information was shared at all. So I don't think it went to the CCRC. I think it was airbrushed from history very consistently, which I have absolutely no reason why that would be the case, which is acceptable.
All right, thank you. 2:05, okay, Mr. Stevens?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Fine.